Christopher Newsom and his girlfriend, Channon Christian, were getting ready to go out for a date night and then meet up with some friends for a birthday party. Unfortunately, Chris and Channon would never arrive at the birthday party. As they got into their vehicle, they were carjacked and then kidnapped on the evening of January 6th, 2007 in Knoxville, Tennessee. They were both taken to a rental house on the rundown side of town. 4 men and a woman tortured, essayed both Chris and Channon, and then took their lives. 24-year-old Latelvis Cobbins' half-brother, 25-year-old Lamarcus Davidson, 23-year-old George Thomas, 34-year-old Eric Boyd, and Cobbins' girlfriend, 18-year-old Vanessa Coleman, were subsequently convicted and sentenced in 2007's kidnapping, robbery, R-word, and red rum. The details in the case of Chris Newsom and Channon Christian are the most heinous, stomach-turning details you may ever hear. This is the case of Christopher Newsom and Channon Christian. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Bronx Tales. This is your host, Bronx Bellamy, and myself as your co-host, Logan. I do want to put a trigger warning on this case and let you know that a lot of these details are particularly gruesome, and if you don't think you can stomach it, go ahead and click off this video, and we will see you in the next one. And for the rest of you, let's get into it. Channon Gail Christian was welcomed to the world on April 29, 1985 by her mother, Dina, father, and older brother, Chase. The Christians were a middle-class family that lived in Nacogdoches, Texas when Channon was born, and then the family relocated to Louisiana and then relocated again when Channon was about 12 to Knoxville, Tennessee, where this family found their forever home. Channon and Chase were absolutely doted on and treated extra special by their parents because their parents were told they would never be able to have children. Channon graduated from Farragut High School in 2003, and she immediately enrolled in college where she majored in sociology. In 2007, Channon was a senior and planned to graduate that same December of 2007. Channon friends and family would describe her as the full package. She was incredibly intelligent, beautiful, responsible, empathetic, and the list goes on. Around October, November-ish of 2007, Channon's friends introduced her to a gentleman named Christopher Newsom, and it was no surprise when they quickly became an item. His name was Hugh Christopher Newsom, known by Chris or Christopher by some of his friends and family, and he was born September 21st, 1983 in Knoxville, Tennessee. He was the baby of the family. Chris was a complete surprise as Chris's parents already had completely grown children when Chris was born. Chris was born a natural athlete and played all different sports. What he was most known for, though, was playing baseball for the Halls High School Red Devils. Some also may not have known that Chris was a talented artist. He spent a lot of his free time woodworking, which he became exceptionally skilled at. Chris then graduated from Hall High School in 2002 and went on to attend Pellissippi State Technical Community College, where he became a carpenter. Channon and Chris were serious about each other. They had tons of common interests and had both just introduced each other to one another's parents, and it went off extremely well. Meeting the parents for both of them went over exceptionally well, and it would be safe to say that they both were starting to think that they had possibly found the one. On the day of January 6, 2007, Chris played golf with his close friend group, and Channon hung out with one of her friends, and they were getting ready to go to a party. It was a mutual friend of Chris and Channon that was having a birthday party, and Chris was going to play golf with his friends. Channon was going to get ready with one of her friends. Chris was going to go pick up Channon, get food, and then all meet up at this party. Channon stayed behind after her friend left to wait for Chris to pick her up. Christopher dropped off his friend at the party and said he was going to pick up Channon, get some food, and they would both be back. Chris arrived at Channon's a little after 9 p.m., January 6, 2007, where he walked up to her door to greet her, and both of them walked to the parking lot together where they hugged and kissed and embraced next to Channon's silver Toyota 4Runner SUV. Nobody could have ever imagined this was the last embrace that Chris and Channon would ever share. They were being watched for a short time in that parking lot by a group of men, and then they were immediately attacked. They were both forced into the back seat of Channon's silver Toyota 4Runner SUV at gunpoint, had their hands tied behind their backs, and were driven to 2316 Chipman Street. This house was on a rundown side of town and was being rented by Lamarcus Davidson. Chris and Channon were led inside Lamarcus Davidson's house by Lamarcus, his half-brother Latalvis Cobbins, their friend George Thomas, another friend Eric Boyd, and inside the house already waiting was Cobbins' girlfriend Vanessa Coleman. Immediately upon entering Davidson's house, Chris and Channon were brutally SA'd. Chris and Channon were separated into different rooms of the house, with Channon being in the north bedroom, which was towards the front of the house, and Chris being in one of the back rooms. Chris was sodomized and R-worded by at least one of the perpetrators. Chris was then blindfolded with a bandana and had a sock stuffed nearly all the way down his throat. The entire time he was sodomized, R-worded, and violated repeatedly. When the evil men were through with Christopher, they tied a mangled dog leash around his neck and they tied his hands behind his back. Christopher wore only a t-shirt and underwear. He was then forced to walk barefoot, tied up and blindfolded, through the backyard and down to a set of railroad tracks where his feet were then bound together. He was then shot in the back and shot in the neck. He miraculously survived these two shootings, but just a few moments later, one of those monsters put the gun against Chris's head just above his right ear and shot him for a third time. This time, the bullet severed his brainstem and he was unalived instantly. The assailants then wrapped Chris up in a comforter, poured gasoline all over him, and set his body on fire. Meanwhile, back at Davidson's rented house, Channon was still enduring repeated SA and physical abuse. If the men ever left the room, it was up to Vanessa Coleman to keep Channon from escaping and making sure Channon was held prisoner. Channon was held against her will and endured the worst attacks you could ever imagine. For 2 days straight, Channon was sexually tortured, sustaining severe injuries to her vagina, anus, and mouth. She was also R-worded with an object, possibly a table leg. Channon was beaten all over her body, kicked in her groin, and beaten in the head repeatedly. She suffered extensive hemorrhaging to her head and groin. She was also covered head to toe in not only bruises, but carpet burns as well. While Channon was still alive, in an effort to remove their DNA from her body, Channon's attackers poured bleach down her throat, scrubbed her body with bleach, including her extremely mutilated genital area. After 2 grueling days of the worst torture you could ever imagine, Channon Christian, who was naked other than her camisole and sweater, was hog-tied with curtains and strips of ripped bedding. They then put a plastic bag tightly over her face and forced her whole body into 5 trash cans. She was then tied in the fetal position and placed inside a garbage can, with the garbage can covered in sheets, and then placed in the kitchen. And then Channon slowly suffocated into the afternoon hours of January 8th. As Channon was slowly dying, Davidson put Christopher Newsom's shoes on his own feet and went to go hang out with his girlfriend, where he gave her Channon's personal items as gifts. Davidson also used Christopher's cell phone this whole time. So while these pieces of crap were attacking and red rumming Chris and Channon, their friends started calling and texting them, wondering why they didn't show up to the birthday party. No response was received by anyone around 11 p.m. on January 6th, the night Chris and Channon were kidnapped. Two of Chris's friends went back to the parking lot the two had been kidnapped from, in which they found Chris's truck still sitting there. The friends were unable to locate Channon's. On January 7th, just after midnight, a driver for the garbage company arrived on Chipman Street and noticed there were lights on in the house at 2316 Chipman Street, and he stated the house seemed pretty busy for that time of night. He also saw a silver Toyota 4Runner in the front of the house, and the porch lights were on. The garbage man then witnessed the 4Runner drive by him slowly, where he saw four black men in the car, and they all stared at him as they drove by. A separate witness who lived about a block away from Chipman Street reported that they heard three pops around 1:45 a.m. coming from the direction of the railroad tracks behind Davidson's house on Chipman Street. On January 7th at 12:30 in the afternoon, Chris Newsom's body was finally discovered near a set of railroad tracks by a Norfolk Southern Railroad employee. A comforter was wrapped around Chris's body, and a sweatshirt was wrapped around his head. His feet were bare and covered in mud, in which it's believed he was made to walk to his death. There was semen found inside Chris's body, but unfortunately the DNA was destroyed when his body was set on fire. On January 7th, Channon was still not answering calls or texts from her mom and friends, and she did not show up to work, which was really unlike her. Channon had amazing friends who never gave up trying to find her. Her friends looked for her all around town, including hospitals and anywhere they thought she might be, with no luck. Channon's parents requested help from law enforcement, in which they were told they were unable to report her missing because she hadn't been missing very long, and that they would just have to really go out and look for her themselves. Shame on them. After Chris's body was found, Channon's SUV was located January 8th around 1:30 in the morning on Cherry Street by her family and friends after her cell phone last pinged on Cherry Street cell tower. Items were missing from the vehicle, such as photographs, phone charger, iPod, teddy bear, and other personal belongings. The family also noticed the seats were pushed back, which told them Channon wasn't driving the vehicle because she wouldn't have been able to reach the pedals with the seat back like that. They also noticed the floorboards were covered in mud, and the stickers Channon had on her windows had been removed, probably in an effort to make her SUV not as noticeable or distinct. Inside the vehicle, the family did find a pack of Newport cigarettes, and neither Chris nor Channon smoked cigarettes. Police later recovered an envelope inside the vehicle that contained fingerprint evidence, which was linked to Lamarcus Davidson, who lived at 2316 Chipman Street, which was 2 blocks from where Channon's SUV was found. The next day, on January 9th, police went to 2316 Chipman Street to try and talk to Davidson, like, hey, why are your fingerprints on an envelope inside of a vehicle that belongs to a missing female college student? But to the officers' horror, they found the house unoccupied and then found Channon Christian's body stuffed in a trash can in the kitchen. Davidson's fingerprints were also found on the garbage bags that Channon was stuffed into, and his fingerprints were also found on the box that contained those particular garbage bags. Lamarcus Davidson's sperm was found inside Channon's vagina, anus, on items that belonged to Channon. It was found all over Davidson's house and on Channon's jeans. His half-brother Latalvis Cobbin's sperm was found inside Channon's mouth, on her camera, on her shirt, and on her jeans. Shell casings found at Davidson's home matched the bullets used to red rum Newsom. After police found Channon's body and Davidson's semen on her clothing and in her body cavities, police were on the search for Lamarcus Davidson. Officers had actually intercepted a phone call between Davidson and Eric Boyd, so police knew that they were friends and both had taken part in the crime. So they asked Eric Boyd for the whereabouts of Davidson. Boyd had informed officers Davidson could be found inside of a vacant house and gave officers the address. Davidson was found at the vacant house along with Christopher Newsom's Nike Shox tennis shoes and the .22 caliber gun used to red rum Christopher Newsom. When Lamarcus Davidson was interrogated, surprise, surprise, he told lie after lie and made up ridiculous story after ridiculous story. I mean, what would you expect from somebody who commits this type of crime against another human being? Also, on the same day, Gregory Thomas, Latelvis Cobbins, and Vanessa Coleman were all arrested in Lebanon, Kentucky. During their arrest, officers seized the computer in which Cobbins and Thomas had been viewing news coverage on the red rums that they had just committed. Police also seized Channon's purse, which contained some of her belongings, and also found Channon's overnight bag. Each of these pieces of garbage pointed the finger at one another during all of their interrogations, and Vanessa Coleman said she was present in the house during the time of the murders. However, she was also held hostage by the 5 men. Unfortunately for Vanessa Coleman, her journal was found after their arrest, and forensic handwriting examiner determined the handwriting matched Vanessa Coleman's. In an entry dated January 9th, it read, "Last night was one of a kind. We stayed with a crackhead that is cool as hell. It snowed a little bit, but it's already melted. Let's talk about adventures. I had one hell of an adventure since I've been in the TN. It's a crazy world these days, but I love the fun adventures and lessons that I've learned. It's going to be a long, interesting year," unquote. Coleman's last line in her journal freaking baffles me, how one person, let alone a group of people, can be so dumb as to think they're going to not get caught. They literally didn't have one full brain cell between all 5 of them. Lamarcus Davidson, whose street name is Slim, was born June 13th, 1981, who was just 25 years old at the time these crimes were committed. He earned 46 charges, 16 counts of felony murder, robbery, and kidnapping, 2 counts of premeditated murder, 2 counts of aggravated robbery, 4 counts of aggravated kidnapping, 20 counts of aggravated R-word, and 2 counts of theft. Davidson was also charged with the robbery of a Pizza Hut just one day after he committed these crimes. Latelvis Cobbins, whose street name is Rome, was just 24 years old at the time he committed these gruesome crimes, and he also earned the exact same 46 charges as his half-brother Lamarcus Davidson. He was also charged with assaulting a correctional officer. He also had a previous charge from 2003 where he was convicted of third-degree attempted robbery in New York. George Thomas, whose street name is Detroit, who was just 23 years old at the time of the crimes, also earned the same 46 charges as his co-defendants, Davidson and Cobbins. Eric Boyd, whose street name is E, who was 34 years old at the time of the crimes, was arrested in connection with the fatal carjacking. He was not indicted by the Knox County Grand Jury in 2007, but instead was indicted by a federal grand jury in the Eastern District of Tennessee on August 23, 2007. The grand jury charged Boyd with being an accessory to a carjacking resulting in serious bodily injury to another person. Vanessa Coleman, who was just 18 years old at the time of these crimes, earned 40 charges. Coleman was indicted on 1 count of premeditated murder, 1 count of aggravated robbery, 4 counts of aggravated kidnapping, 20 counts of aggravated R-word, and 2 counts of theft. Believe it or not, there ended up being 2 trials. I'll keep this part short, even though there are tons of ridiculous details. But the original judge, named Judge Baumgardner, who presided over the first trial, was actually disbarred after this trial on March 2011 from being addicted to drugs while hearing cases and passing down sentences in which the people thought he was not capable of making a clear-minded decision while high. Judge Baumgardner was also purchasing his drugs from convicts that he possibly sent to jail. I will save you the verdicts from the first trial because they really don't matter anyways, as they were all thrown out, and the second trial was held on the same charges. Lamarcus Davidson was found guilty on all charges and sent to death on October 30th, 2009. Latelvis Cobbins was found guilty on all charges and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. George Thomas was found guilty on all charges and was sentenced to 42 years in prison. He will be released in the year 2053. Eric Boyd was found guilty on all charges and was sentenced to 18 years in prison. He was potentially eligible for release in 2022, but was found guilty on new charges of R-word and first-degree murder in 2019. He is now serving a life sentence. Vanessa Coleman was found guilty on all of her charges and was sentenced to 35 years and is scheduled for release in 2036. She was up for parole in 2014, in which she was denied parole. She again went in front of the parole board in December of 2020, and a unanimous decision was given in which Coleman was denied parole. She is eligible to ask for parole again in the year 2030. There have been legislative changes thanks to the fight of the victims' families. 2 new laws were made in 2014 as a result of what happened to Christopher Newsom and Channon Christian. The Chris Newsom Act was introduced to eliminate the need for a judge's signature on a jury verdict after the delivery of a unanimous verdict. Had this law been in place originally, the trials wouldn't have needed to take place. The second trials wouldn't have needed to take place. The Channon Christian Act restricts attorneys and defendants in attempting to portray a victim in a negative light, like making allegations about their behavior or character. See, during the trial, Lamarcus Davidson lied on the stand and said that the victims came to his house to buy drugs and that Channon wanted to have intercourse with these men. A deceased victim who cannot defend themselves should never be able to have their attacker sit on a stand and have lies told about them and their character. Should never be able to have their character slaughtered, even in death, especially after what these soulless individuals did to them in life. Christopher Newsom and Channon Christian's case is absolutely one of the most gut-wrenching cases I've ever known about. I couldn't imagine having the wherewithal to know what's happening to you and what's going to happen to you. To do everything in your life right and have it end in such a horrific way just makes me sick. It's people like these men that sometimes make me sway harder towards the punishment of an eye for an eye. And to the victims and the victims' loved ones, we are so unbelievably sorry that this happened to you. This is all we have for you today. Thank you for joining your host, Bronx, and myself, Logan, for another episode of Bronx Tales. I hope everybody has a wonderful day.